Chief Astronomer Neela adjusted the specialized filters on the observatory's main telescope, her four-fingered hands trembling slightly as she calibrated the final measurements. The star above Caloran Prime pulsed an angry red through the viewfinder, its surface churning with violent storms that shouldn't exist on a star that had been stable for millions of years. Recording complete, her assistant announced, his voice unnaturally calm, the result of generations of Caloran emotional suppression techniques. Neela transferred the data to her personal device. The council must see this immediately. The walk to the council chambers took precisely 7 minutes. Everything on Caloran was measured with exacting precision. Yet today it felt both too short and eternally long. The High Council, 12 of the most logical and advanced minds of the Caloran species, waited in their circular arrangement, their silver skin reflecting the soft ambient lighting. Chief Astronomer, Elder Vox acknowledged, his elongated head tilting slightly. Your urgent request interrupts important trade deliberations. Neela stepped to the center of the chamber and projected her findings onto the hemispheric display above. Distinguished Council, our sun is dying. The display showed measurement after measurement, calculation after calculation. Stellar degradation models played out in accelerated time, showing the increasingly erratic behavior of their once reliable star. How long? Asked Councillor Zell, her voice betraying the slightest tremor, a significant emotional display for a Caloran. Total stellar collapse within one planetary cycle. Lethal radiation levels in approximately 78 rotations. The council chambers erupted in what counted as panic among the Caloran. Rapid blinking, elevated speech patterns, and the subtle release of stress pheromones that tinged the air with a metallic scent. Evacuation options? Asked Elder Vox, maintaining composure better than his colleagues. Ambassador Telliver, youngest of the council and liaison to the few alien species the Caloran deigned to communicate with, pulled up the relevant statistics. Our current fleet capacity could evacuate approximately 12 million citizens. Out of 5 billion, Councillor Zell clarified unnecessarily. The Caloran, for all their advanced quantum computing and mental enhancement technologies, had never prioritized space travel. Their fragile physiology, evolved on a world with minimal gravity and a protective atmospheric envelope, made them poorly suited for the rigors of space. Their ships were precision instruments, designed for efficiency rather than durability or capacity. We must consider all options, Telliver suggested, including external assistance. Elder Vox's inner eyelids snapped shut in disapproval. We have maintained our superiority precisely by limiting dependency on lesser species. And we will maintain our extinction with equal efficiency if we don't seek help, Telliver countered, breaking protocol with her directness. After 6 hours of debate, lightning fast by Caloran standards, a decision was reached. Ambassador Telliver was authorized to send a galactic distress signal against traditionalist opposition. In the communications array, the most powerful on the planet, Telliver composed the message personally. It contained detailed evacuation requirements, planetary coordinates, and a formal request for immediate assistance. As the signal began pulsing outward at light speed, she felt a sensation foreign to most Caloran, hope mixed with desperation. The first responses arrived within days. The Volturi Collective sent polite regrets, their algorithmic response calculating the mission statistically unviable given current transit capabilities. The Diraxian Empire acknowledged receipt, citing prior defensive commitments that prevented intervention. The Galthan Consortium didn't bother responding at all. Each passing day dimmed what little hope remained. The Caloran began preparations for their species' end, cataloging their knowledge for automated beacons that might preserve some record of their existence after they were gone. On the 18th day, their outdated emergency receiver, maintained only as a backup, crackled with a crude audio transmission, lacking the neural interface standards used by advanced civilizations. This is Admiral Helena Reyes of the United Earth Fleet. We've received your distress call. We're coming. Hold on. The voice belonged to a species barely a century into their spacefaring age, one the Caloran had dismissed as primitive newcomers to the galactic community. Telever played the message for the council. Eldervox listened, his expression unreadable. "The humans," he finally said. "They lack faster-than-light capabilities. They couldn't possibly reach us in time." Telever replayed the message, focusing on the determination in the human's voice. "They're coming anyway." The United Fleet Command Center in Geneva buzzed with frantic activity. Officers darted between holographic displays, their faces taut with stress as they calculated fuel requirements, life support limitations, and the brutal physics of their proposed mission. 15 light-years with no FTL capability. It's suicide. General Kaminsky pounded his fist on the conference table, scattering tablets. "Even pushing our experimental drives beyond safety limits, we barely make it there before their sun collapses, with no guarantee we could make it back." Admiral Helena Reyes stood silently at the head of the table, dust from the Mars shipyard still clinging to her uniform. She'd been inspecting colonial transports when the alien signal had been decoded. Now she spread star charts across the holodeck, her weathered fingers tracing potential routes. "We retrofit every cargo hauler, colony ship, and military vessel with our experimental fusion drives," she said, her voice cutting through the argument. "We strip them down, minimize life support to essentials, and we push the engines beyond safety limits. We can make it, and kill how many humans in the attempt?" Kaminsky challenged. Helena's eyes hardened. "Only volunteers. But I suspect we'll have more than we need." Outside the command center, a crowd had gathered. News of the alien distress call had leaked almost immediately, sparking heated debate. Some carried signs demanding Earth first, while others countered with humanity answers. Security forces formed a barrier between opposing groups as Helena stepped outside to address them. "Today we decide what humanity stands for in this universe," she called out, her amplified voice silencing the crowd. "Are we the species that turns away from suffering because the odds are against us? Or are we the ones who try the impossible because it's right?" Back inside, the decision was made. Political leaders bickered over resource allocation, but public opinion had swung dramatically after Helena's speech went viral. Within 48 hours, the retrofitting operation began. A chaotic global effort as engineers worked around the clock at shipyards from Earth orbit to the Martian docks. On the third day of preparations, Helena received an unexpected visitor. The Volturi observer, Tactician Solus, requested a private audience, arriving with encrypted data crystals hidden within his exoskeletal diplomatic casing. "Your species continues to fascinate us, Admiral," the insectoid alien clicked. Mandibles working as his translation device converted the sounds to English. "Your mission calculations are correct. It's physically impossible." He projected the Caloran system's deterioration models, more detailed than anything human sensors had captured. "The star's degradation is accelerating beyond initial projections. Even my people's fastest ships couldn't reach them in time, which is why we declined assistance." Helena studied the alien's compound eyes, searching for emotion in a face evolved to show none. "Then it's good you're not sending your fastest ships," she replied evenly. "We're sending our most stubborn people." Solus tilted his head, an approximation of confusion. "You still intend to attempt this rescue, knowing it cannot succeed?" "That's exactly why we have to try," Helena said, accessing the smuggled technical specifications Solus had brought. "Your people calculate odds. Mine defy them." The Volturi appeared to consider this, antennae twitching slightly. "I've included our most advanced shield designs. They're theoretically compatible with your propulsion systems, though we've never tested them under such extreme conditions." "Thank you," Helena said, realizing this alien was risking much by helping them. "Don't thank me," Solus replied. "My official report will state that I attempted to dissuade you from this foolishness. Unofficially, I find myself curious whether your species' irrationality might accomplish what our logic deems impossible." As the Volturi departed, Helena turned back to the launch preparations. 200 ships, 15,000 crew volunteers for a mission with calculated survival odds below 20%. The largest humanitarian effort in human history, for an alien species most humans had never even seen images of. "Admiral," her aide interrupted, "the first 50 ships report ready for retrofit inspection." Helena nodded, squaring her shoulders. "Then let's not keep the Caloran waiting." Chief Engineer Marcus Chen stared at the Volturi engine schematics floating in his workshop's holographic display. 3 days without sleep had left him with bloodshot eyes and a permanent tremor in his left hand. But his mind remained razor-sharp. "They're thinking like immortals," he muttered to his team of bleary-eyed engineers. "Everything built to last centuries." He grabbed a stylus and began ruthlessly redlining entire sections of the alien designs. His team watched in growing horror as he systematically violated every engineering principle they'd been taught. "Sir," Lieutenant Park interrupted, "those radiation buffers are essential for long-term operation," Marcus finished. "We don't need them at full capacity. We're not building these ships to last decades." He expanded the propulsion schematics, highlighting the reaction chamber. "We're going to run these engines hot, 300% beyond redline. They'll burn out after the mission, but that gives us just enough speed to reach the Caloran in time. The hulls can't withstand that kind of stress," Commander Rodriguez objected. Marcus nodded, "which is why we're reinforcing them with the carbon lattice material developed for the Mars atmospheric processors. It won't last forever, but it doesn't need to." After the briefing, Admiral Rice found Marcus alone, calculating material requirements. "Be straight with me, Marcus," she said quietly. "What are our real chances?" He didn't look up from his work. "If everything goes perfectly, maybe 60% of our ships make it there. Perhaps 40% make it back. And the crews?" His hand stilled. "Lower. The radiation shielding compromises mean increased exposure. We can mitigate with medication and rotation schedules. But give me numbers, Marcus." He met her eyes. 30% casualty rate even if everything goes perfectly. Which it won't. She absorbed this, then nodded. "The volunteers know the risks." "Not all of them. Not really." His voice was barely audible. "Some of these modifications, I'd never get them approved under normal safety protocols. These aren't normal times. Do what you have to do." Meanwhile, on Caloran, Ambassador Telliver faced growing unrest as she announced that only humans were attempting rescue. The Grand Plaza outside the council chambers filled with citizens, their normally controlled demeanors cracking under existential terror. "The primitives." A citizen shouted, his voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. "The species that still requires sleep. That bleeds when injured instead of self-sealing. These are our saviors." Religious zealots had taken to the streets, claiming cosmic judgment had come for the Calorans' technological arrogance. "Our sun dies because we have failed the Creator's test," they proclaimed, their usually hidden ceremonial robes now worn openly. In contrast, the scientific coalition argued that human biological redundancies, their strange dual-lung breathing system, their inefficient but robust digestive process, might make them uniquely suited for the rescue. Telliver stood at her office window, watching Caloran's sun flare violently. Each burst of solar radiation knocked out more satellite systems. The protective shields that had served them for generations were failing under the star's increasing instability. Elder Vox joined her, his usually rigid posture showing subtle signs of fatigue. "The humans have provided their fleet specifications," Telliver said. 200 vessels, modified beyond their normal capabilities. "And what do their calculations show?" Vox asked. "They didn't send any probability assessments." Vox blinked rapidly in surprise, the Caloran equivalent of astonishment. "How do they make decisions without statistical certainty?" Telliver turned from the window. "The human admiral sent only one additional message. We're coming. Be ready." The elder was silent for several moments. "They truly are primitive," he finally said, but his tone lacked its usual derision. "They may be primitive," Tulliver replied, watching another solar flare illuminate the horizon. "But they're coming when no one else would." Day 23 of transit. Approaching the midway point to the Calaran system, Communications Officer Javier Rodriguez recorded in his log, voice raspy from breathing recycled air. His bloodshot eyes stared at the camera, dark circles beneath them testament to the triple shifts he'd been working since his backup collapsed from radiation exposure. He took a sip of water, grimacing at the metallic taste from the failing filtration systems. The Dauntless and Artemis were lost yesterday to catastrophic engine failures. All crew evacuated to already overcrowded vessels. That brings our total to 12 ships lost. Throughout the human fleet, similar scenes played out. Heat shields degraded under the constant burn of engines pushed far beyond their design limits. Radiation leaked into crew quarters despite jury-rigged shielding. Food synthesizers failed, forcing strict rationing of emergency supplies. In the medical bay of the flagship Endeavour, Dr. Sarah Kimura checked Admiral Raya's radiation burns while reviewing fleet-wide health reports. "The anti-radiation meds are holding for now," she said quietly. "But we're seeing increased cellular damage in crews on the older vessels. Their shielding was never meant for this kind of exposure." Reyes winced as the doctor applied regenerative gel to her blistered skin. "Can they complete the mission?" "They'll push through," Kimura answered, not directly addressing the question. Both women knew the real concern wasn't completing the mission. It was surviving afterward. Despite her condition, Admiral Reyes continued daily broadcasts to the fleet from the Endeavour's command center, her uniform collar raised to hide the worst of her radiation burns. "We've passed the point of no return," she announced, her image transmitted to every vessel. "Either we succeed, or we die trying. There is no middle ground now, no retreat, no surrender. Remember why we're here." The screen showed images of the Calaran homeworld, its surface still beautiful despite the angry red star looming above it. 5 billion lives depending on what remained of the human fleet. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council had initially dismissed the human rescue attempt as doomed foolishness. Now, their monitoring stations tracked the fleet's progress with growing fascination. Observer Genta, an Arcturian xenobiologist, had been assigned to document the expected failure for the Council archives. Instead, she found herself breaking protocol, sending encrypted medical data to the human fleet. "Their cellular structure is unlike anything we've cataloged," she reported secretly to a small group of like-minded scientists. "Their bodies actively repair radiation damage that would be fatal to most species. They process toxins that would kill us instantly." She displayed bioscans taken from distance monitoring. "Look at these stress hormone levels. Any Arcturian with these readings would be catatonic. Yet they continue functioning." "How?" asked one of her colleagues. Genta played audio intercepted from intership communications, humans laughing during a crisis, trading jokes while repairing critical systems, sharing stories of Earth during rare rest periods. "They're using humor to maintain psychological stability in conditions that would induce madness in most species," she explained. "And something else we don't fully understand yet: hope. They genuinely believe they can succeed despite all evidence to the contrary." Back on the fleet, the brutal reality of their situation continued to claim victims. The memorial services had stopped after the 5th day. There simply wasn't time. Names of the fallen were added to a growing list, to be honored properly if they ever reached home. Captain Nguyen of the Transport Venture sent a fleet-wide transmission after his ship lost primary life support, rerouting power from non-essential systems. "Still on course. Still fighting." It became an unofficial motto, repeated across the dwindling fleet as system after system failed, as crew members collapsed from exhaustion only to return to their posts after minimal rest. "Still on course. Still fighting." The human fleet emerged from emergency FTL, drives smoking and systems failing, to confront a hellscape beyond their worst projections. Calaran's sun dominated the view screens, its surface a churning nightmare of plasma storms, and massive eruptions. Tendrils of solar fire stretched millions of kilometers into space, dwarfing the planets in its grip. Lieutenant Commander Aisha Okoro, radiation specialist aboard the flagship Endeavour, stared at her readings in disbelief as the ship's outer sensor arrays fried instantly upon exposure. "This is beyond our worst projections," she reported, recalibrating her equipment. "Radiation levels are... I don't even have a scale for this. The Caloran must be in their deepest emergency shelters by now." Admiral Reyes, moving stiffly from her radiation treatments, studied the tactical display. Their fleet, once 200 strong, now numbered barely over 100 vessels, many operating on backup systems and emergency power. "How long until total stellar collapse?" she asked. Aisha swallowed hard. "Days, not weeks. We arrived just in time." "Or too late," muttered the science officer, pointing to atmospheric readings from the planet below. "Those radiation levels shouldn't permit surface survival, even for the Caloran in their bunkers." Reyes straightened. Decision made. "We proceed as planned. Establish evacuation protocols immediately. All landing-capable vessels prepare for surface operations." Captain Miguel Santos led the first landing team, their shuttle breaking through Caloran's atmosphere amid turbulence caused by solar interference. The planet's once pristine cities showed signs of hasty evacuation. Abandoned vehicles, doors left open, personal belongings scattered in streets. Following emergency beacon signals, they located the first group of Caloran survivors huddled in a failing shielded zone beneath what had once been a government complex. The alien's silver skin had dulled to an unhealthy gray, and many showed signs of radiation poisoning despite their protective measures. Ambassador Telever stepped forward as the humans entered, her translator device activating. "You actually came," she said, disbelief evident despite her species' usual emotional control. "We said we would," Santos replied simply, then gestured to his team to begin evacuation procedures. The telepathic Caloran recoiled upon first physical contact with the humans, overwhelmed by the emotional signatures washing over their logical minds. A chaotic storm of determination, fear, hope, and raw protective instinct. Their own emotional suppression, evolved over thousands of years of cultural development, left them unprepared for the intensity of human feelings. "Your minds," gasped one Caloran scientist. "They're so loud." "Sorry about that," a human medic replied while scanning the alien's vital signs. "We'll try to think quieter." The evacuation began in earnest, with teams fanning out across the planet's surface to locate remaining shelters. Many had already failed, their occupants lost to the increasing radiation. Those still functioning operated on emergency power, their shielding deteriorating by the hour. Aboard the orbiting fleet, ships prepared to receive refugees far beyond their designed capacity. Every available space was converted for Caloran life support requirements, with human crews working frantically to modify environmental systems. The first fully loaded evacuation vessels had just broken atmosphere when the solar monitoring system blared an emergency alert. A massive solar superstorm, the largest yet recorded, was building on the star's surface, aimed directly at Caloran's orbit. "Time to impact," Reyes demanded. 17 minutes, came the grim reply. "The radiation surge will fry everything in orbit, including our ships, and penetrate to the planet's surface. Nothing will survive." 3 captains, Chen of the Beijing, Bautista of the Manila, and O'Neill of the Celtic, exchanged glances on the emergency channel. "Endeavour, this is Captain Chen. We have a solution." His voice was calm, resigned. "The Beijing, Manila, and Celtic will position as radiation shields. Our hulls can absorb the initial wave." "Absolutely not," Reyes objected immediately. "Those are suicide positions." "With respect, Admiral," Chen replied, "we've already calculated. 3 ships or the entire fleet. The math is simple." Before Reyes could respond, the 3 vessels broke formation, positioning themselves between the fleet and the oncoming solar storm. Their final transmissions were broadcast across all channels. Complete the mission. In the fleet's makeshift command center, hastily established in a Caloran government bunker, Captain Sarah Mbiki stared at population calculations displayed on a hybrid human-Caloran interface. The Caloran High Council members watched in silence, their silver skin now dull with stress and radiation exposure. 3.2 billion loaded, 1.8 billion remaining, Sarah announced, her voice steady despite 30 hours without sleep. And we've lost 47% of our transport capacity. The mathematics were brutal, inescapable. Not everyone would fit in the remaining vessels. The complex calculation algorithms the Caloran representatives had provided only confirmed what human intuition had already grasped. Millions would be left behind. Medical Officer Dr. James Katsuro slammed his tablet on the central table, an uncharacteristic display of emotion from the usually reserved physician. The device cracked, adding another item to the growing list of irreplaceable equipment. Our life support systems are already at 150% capacity, he said, running a hand through his gray-streaked hair. We've been hot bunking for weeks. Environmental recyclers are failing across the fleet. Oxygen generation is barely keeping up with current numbers. A junior officer, Lieutenant Diaz, looked up from her calculations. What if we left some human personnel behind? That would free up additional. No. Admiral Rice silenced the discussion with a single word as she entered, her uniform hanging loosely on her radiation-thin frame. Despite Dr. Katsuro's best efforts, her exposure during the solar storm rescue had taken its toll. No one gets left behind, human or Caloran. She activated the central display, bringing up schematics of the remaining fleet vessels. We implement Protocol Omega. A murmur ran through the human officers. The protocol, drafted during the mission planning, but never expected to be implemented, would convert all human quarters, all redundant systems, even weapon storage into makeshift cryo chambers for Caloran refugees. But Admiral, Dr. Katsuro objected, stepping closer to Reyes and lowering his voice. Where will our people go? Where will they sleep? How will they function? Reyes met his gaze. We don't sleep. We operate in continuous shifts until mission completion or system failure, whichever comes first. That's not physiologically possible, Katsuro insisted. Even with stimulants, humans need at least minimal rest cycles. We're already at breaking point. Then we break, Reyes replied simply, and keep going anyway. When the Caloran translator finished converting the exchange, the council members exchanged their species' equivalent of shocked glances. Elder Vox, once the most skeptical of human intentions, approached the Admiral. You would sacrifice your own recovery spaces for our people, he asked, his translator struggling to convey the concept. In Caloran culture, personal restoration chambers were sacred, inviolable. We would, Rice confirmed. But your biology requires periods of unconsciousness. Without these sleep cycles, you will experience neural degradation, eventually leading to death. We're aware of the risks. The Caloran elder was silent for a moment, processing this information. Then, to the astonishment of both humans and Caloran present, a thin line of moisture formed at the corner of his eye, his species' first recorded emotional tears. For people you've never met before, he said, the concept clearly difficult for him to grasp. That's what humans do, Rice said simply. The conversion began immediately. Every non-essential space throughout the fleet was reconfigured for Caloran life support. Engineers worked frantically to adapt human technology to accommodate alien biology. Medical teams developed emergency cryo protocols to maintain minimal metabolic functions in the refugees during transit. In the midst of this controlled chaos, Admiral Reyes received reports of human crew members voluntarily giving up their last personal items, photos of loved ones, treasured books, even wedding rings, to make space for Caloran cultural artifacts and knowledge repositories. Tell them, she instructed her communications officer, that Earth thanks them for their sacrifice. Then she turned to the Caloran Council. Now, let's save your people. The human fleet, now a shadow of its former self, broke orbit from the dying Caloran world as the final superflare began to engulf the planet's outer atmosphere. Observation drones left in stable orbit transmitted the last images of a once beautiful civilization being reclaimed by stellar fire. Aboard the transport Zhengyi, Captain Li Bai Chen recorded the 83rd human death since departing Caloran space. Engineer Maria Rivera, who had manually vented a radiation leak rather than risk the automatic systems disturbing the Caloran cryo chambers nearby. She knew the risk. Chen noted in the official log, his voice flat from exhaustion. She made her choice. Throughout the fleet, the human crews operated on rotation schedules that defied medical science. 4 hours on duty, 2 hours for rest, not sleep, as most habitable spaces had been converted to refugee housing. The stimulant cocktails developed by Dr. Katsuro kept them functioning, but at a severe cost to their long-term health. Ships designed for 300 crew members now carried thousands of cryogenically suspended Caloran, with environmental systems stretched beyond all safety parameters. Repairs were made with salvaged parts, creative workarounds, and sometimes sheer determination when materials ran out. Engineering reports another coolant leak in Section 4. Communications Officer Park reported on the flagship Endeavor. Lieutenant Commander Ramirez didn't look up from the system diagnostics. Reroute through the secondary backup. The secondary is already handling the primary's load. Then seal the section and let it overheat. We'll deal with the damage later. Such exchanges had become routine. Impossible choices made every hour, with crew members accepting increasingly dangerous conditions as the new normal. Throughout the galaxy, attitudes toward the human mission had shifted dramatically. The Volturi Collective, whose initial analysis had deemed the rescue statistically unviable, dispatched their fastest engineering vessels, carrying replacement parts compatible with human systems. The calculations were correct, Arch-Engineer Talvi explained to the Collective's High Council. The mission was impossible by all known parameters. And yet, they're succeeding. We must understand how. The Duraxian Empire, warriors who had stood apart from galactic politics for centuries, broke their isolation policy, sending a battle cruiser escort to rendezvous with the human fleet. Their commander transmitted a single message: "Your courage honors us. We stand with you." Even the Galactic Council, which had initially dismissed the mission as human foolishness, convened an emergency session to discuss the implications of what was unfolding. Admiral Reyes, now confined to medical support after collapsing during her 4th consecutive 20-hour shift, received their official communication. "We were wrong," the message stated simply. In the crew quarters converted to refugee housing, something unexpected was happening among the Caloran who had been awakened from cryo-sleep to monitor their sleeping brethren. They watched as human crew members shared their meager rations with Caloran children, told jokes during system failures, and maintained hope despite the odds. Ambassador Telever spent hours observing Lieutenant Sophia Chin, teaching a group of Caloran younglings a card game, explaining the concept of bluffing, pretending a situation was better than reality indicated. "But that's deliberately misleading," one of the Caloran protested. "Why would this be beneficial?" "Sometimes," Sophia explained, dealing another hand, "believing you can win is half the battle." Telever recorded these interactions, noting how the typically logical Caloran children began adopting human expressions and behaviors. When a particularly severe system failure rocked the ship, causing lights to flicker, a young Caloran named Mira placed her hand on Sophia's shoulder, a gesture of comfort she had learned from humans. "We will endure," Mira said, echoing words she had heard countless times from the crew. Telever, studying these behaviors, began to understand the power of something her species had never developed: faith in the face of impossible odds. The surviving human fleet, now just 83 vessels of the original 200, approached Earth orbit with engines failing and life support systems held together by emergency patches and desperate ingenuity. Cheers erupted in mission control as the first ships appeared on long-range scanners, though they quickly faded as the extent of the damage became clear. Vessels designed for grace now limped home, their hulls scorched and warped from radiation exposure. Some were being towed by others, their engines completely burned out from the sustained overload. All showed signs of emergency repairs, patched hull breaches, improvised radiation shielding, and manual course corrections to compensate for failed navigation systems. Admiral Reyes, her body ravaged by radiation, but her mind sharp as ever, insisted on broadcasting from her medical bay to the United Earth Council. Medical staff reluctantly set up the equipment around her bed, where she lay connected to multiple treatment devices. Her message was simple, delivered without flourish. The mission is complete. We have delivered 4.2 billion Caloran refugees to safety. The cost was acceptable. The broadcast, picked up by every species in the galactic community, triggered an unprecedented gathering. Representatives from 17 previously isolated civilizations requested permission to attend the humans' celebration ceremony, many offering technological and medical assistance to the returning crews. The Caloran, still adjusting to life in hastily established settlements on terraformed Venus and Mars colonies, proposed a radical idea: a complete sharing of their advanced technology with humans, violating millennia of development protocols. They have earned it, Elder Vox stated to the emergency Galactic Council session, his once rigid demeanor now showing subtle emotional cues he had learned from his time among humans. More than earned it. The official ceremony took place 3 weeks after the fleet's return. Many of the crew members remained in medical treatment, their bodies struggling to recover from radiation exposure, extreme fatigue, and the side effects of long-term stimulant use. Those well enough to attend sat in places of honor as representatives from across the galaxy paid tribute to their accomplishment. Ambassador Telever approached the podium, now modified to accommodate her taller frame. She surveyed the gathered humans, political leaders, military officials, family members of those who didn't return. We measured advancement by the elegance of our equations and the efficiency of our systems, she began, her translator conveying the new emotional depth in her voice. We were wrong. True advancement is measured by what you will sacrifice for others, by your capacity to attempt the impossible. She gestured to the Caloran children seated throughout the assembly, many now adopting human mannerisms and expressions. My species has existed for over 15,000 of your years. We have built wonders, unlocked cosmic secrets, and extended our lifespans beyond what you can imagine. Yet in all that time, we never learned what your children know instinctively, that connection to others gives meaning beyond logic, that courage often defies calculation. As the ceremony concluded, the newly installed emergency broadcast system activated with 3 simultaneous distress calls, a Diraxian colony ship damaged by micrometeorites with thousands of lives at risk, a Volturi research station experiencing cascade system failure in the Proxima Centauri system, and a newly discovered sentient species facing extinction from a rogue comet approaching their homeworld. Each message ended with the same request that had never before been made in galactic history. We need immediate assistance. Please send humans. Admiral Reyes, watching from her hospital room, smiled faintly as she saw crew members already rising from their seats, ready to answer the call despite their injuries and exhaustion. Prepare the fleet, she whispered to her aide. We have work to do.